the professional technology advisors. I loved it for many years, and I hear it now. People talk about legacy engines, legacy application, legacy. And of course, the business now said, do you know, right, that legacy has that really negative connotation. Legacy. Well, actually, it's not legacy. Legacy implies old, unworkable. Everything that goes live this week is legacy next week. It hasn't quite worked in my company, but certainly in Aviva I was before now, and increasingly in Specsavers, we insist that we call our older engines our heritage applications. Now notice the subtle change of language. Legacy implies almost irrelevant, old, unfashionable, unusable. You've probably heard, if you come from the UK, of something called value added tax, or VAT, a sales tax if you will. When I arrived in HMRC, the VAT engine was from 1974, a legacy engine, if you will. And we were about to put the whole of HMRC online, which was the basic tenure of my time in HMRC. And of course, the architects came to me and said, Phil, the VAT machine is legacy. Now, I suppose I'm supposed to have drawn from that conclusion it's bad, but that was just an interesting statement. Slide 2, of course, said we need to replace it. Slide 3 said, of course, I need multi-millions, if not billions, to replace it. And slide 4 says, are you going to tell the Chancellor or me? Because the idea of changing the VAT machine that generates £250 billion a year was somewhat nervous in terms of the go-live date, as you can probably imagine. The VAT machine today, by the way, is still 1974, but it's online. There is no paper. You can't even register it in paper. You can't actually sort of account for what you're doing or pay for it. Because it wasn't legacy. It was the heritage driving for the UK economy $250 billion a year. And because we keep talking about legacy, ultimately people believe it. And then ultimately the commercial leadership, if we're not careful, of our partners is poor. The IT industry sold, supported by SIs and suppliers, that if we get third parties in to run the non-core elements of our IT, things will be better. Perhaps you remember the slideshow from your careers. Slideshows from suppliers that says something like adopt, adapt, and improve, or adopt, adapt, sort of innovate. Remember those sort of, it's sort of broadly split into those three categories. What they really meant was adopt, all right, adapt, and ask for more money. Because ultimately, outsourcing has not delivered what the business thought it would, because we sold them the story. We sold them that they actually were delivering a much better level of service, a much more value for money level of service, or cheaper if you will. That there will be almost limitless expansion capability, almost on call, and innovations from them and their partners would pour through the door almost free. Now, by the way, I don't think the suppliers ever sold us that story, but we helped them sell that to our business. And of course, ultimately, many CEOs are disappointed. So commercial leadership of our partners is poor. And my last point here is that cost versus agility versus value for money almost become, pace, agility, value for money, almost becomes an endless debate. That's a debate. We spend a lot of time in IT, but in the meantime, we'll find the business is going somewhere. We need to move, and IT has not. I remember a very famous quote, if I can quote it, from Buzz Aldridge, when he was being interviewed, the space explorer, if you will, when he's been interviewed, he said to him, just before takeoff, what was your final few thoughts before the spaceship took off? And he said, my final thoughts are this. As I was lying strapped into the capsule, I could hear the engines rumbling. I thought about all this power getting to the moon. And all I could think was, there are 2 million parts of this rocket, all of them supplied by the lowest cost bidder. It made me nervous. And I thought that was a fair statement. Because cost versus pace versus agility is very important. Because we've gone on a cost game when in fact we really should have gone on a value for money game. And that, I believe, has left us with issues. So what do we do? If that's the size of the problem I'm describing, against the thesis is the IT department dead, what do we do about it? How do we deal with this monolith where we are? Well, a very famous story is told in Napoleon's time of a gentleman called Leverve, who was his actual advisor in battles, a very famous advisor, and advising for many years. And once when he was pacing the coast in France, looking over on a clear day, you could almost make out the smudge on the sort of horizon of the White Cliffs of Dover. And in his anger, and he'd been like this in a real funk for days, Napoleon, Leverve went to him and said, what is it? He said, I want to know how we can get across this stretch of water and invade this nation. And Leverve stepped back and he said, well, I admire the size of your problem, but I've got no solution. Interesting enough, he died of food poisoning, allegedly, the next day, and you can read it in history books. Many people can admire the size of our issue, but they don't always have the answer, because the answer lays inside the team itself. I believe, first of all, the solution to whether the IT department is better or not, to resusc it almost, is among leadership itself. And I'll come back to that as a subject right at the very end. We need to stand up and be the people, our business, be the person our business and our people need and deserve. I believe IT needs to find itself a new role, what the business needs now, not what the business used to need. We need to become a true partner through business-centric design, business-centric thinking. We need to give away the ownership of everything. In Specsavers, we have 3 huge change programs which are infused with IT that IT have been running. And I recently appointed a business leader to report to the board, as well as to me, to run them. Everybody said, you're mad. IT have run these projects for years. These are IT projects. Why would you let the business run them? We need to give them away because they're not ours. IT owning stuff, I believe, fundamentally is wrong. We are the partner, the signposts. We are part of the collective. We are not the owner of it. And then we need to be more user-centric in how we deliver stuff, designing stuff through the eyes of the user. In HMRC, part of my time, I went out and visited every single department, which was very exciting because they had customs, and I remember doing on a cutter in the channel, doing a customs inspections with a small dog that was sniffing for cigarettes and contraband. I wasn't particularly good, but the dog was very good. But all sorts of exciting stuff. But one day I went out with a VAT inspector, and I'll describe her to you. She was just over 5 foot, 5'1". She was in her mid to late 50s, so quite an older lady, vastly experienced. And I went to meet her in the South London, in Southall, in the headquarters, before we went out to meet an Iranian import-export company moving hard tractors, big pieces of plant, allegedly claiming back tens of thousands of VAT. So you can imagine where her suspicions were. So I met her and I thought, good grief. I mean, these companies are probably full of quite sort of largish people. But anyway, she seemed very confident. And she briefed me. She showed me the screens and she showed me that material. Then she reached into a drawer and she took out from her drawer her laptop. I'm thinking, how cool. I'm the IT guy, right? This is good news. She's going to be using her laptop. And she gets out of her laptop and its bag, and she takes her laptop out of the bag, puts it back in the drawer and locks it, and starts to fill stuff in the bag. I said, excuse me, what are you doing? She said, well, this laptop's useless. It's too heavy. It takes ages to log on. But the bag is fantastic. It's got double zips, so I can keep all my papers in it. And I took that story back to the leadership team of IT, who were very full of themselves and very confident about what they're doing. It didn't last for very long after I started, but in the first few weeks of my time there, very confident. As a description of how we designed a laptop mobile solution that actually could not be used by the user. We sent her a brand new bag. It looked like quite dog-eared, the one she was using. And she was very grateful for that. But she had no laptop in it because she clearly didn't like it, but the bag was useful. We need to design through the eyes of the user. Use business process re-engineering more to drive a different answer. We need to commercialize our IT department by retooling it, by training our people to be commercial and to handle commercial relationships, to remember who the customer is. I've been in 18 companies now. I've sat probably for the last 16 of those 18 companies in supplier workshops or for supplier presentations, and I have to pinch myself halfway through to remind myself who is the customer in the meeting. As they flog me the latest thing they're incentivized to give to me. Not I wanted it, by the way, but it turns out they think I do. We have to become subject matter experts on a permanent basis, a permanent commitment to gain credibility, to challenge, provide value for money. There is software now that actually in live can show you every single transaction, every single keystroke and its price against your CMDB. And so every department, every hour could log on and find the cost of their team overnight. It's been available for 5 years. Hardly any companies buy it and use it. And I go to big companies and teams and departments and say, well, I pay this blob of money to IT. I've got no idea what it gets me. Well, this software will tell you for single pounds. Remarkable behaviour changes.